Now we have a couple of changes worth reporting today that happened in the last couple of days. The first one being that Torghast is now also account-wide. Now, the interesting part about this change is that we basically got the Twisting Corridors account-wide before we even got Torghast. You know, when Twisting Corridors came out, you were able to progress through the layers regardless of the character you were playing. So, you could have gotten up on your main and done layer 1 and 2, and then log on your alt, complete layer 3 and 4, back on your main to do 5 and 6, and they will be shared amongst all your characters, but not actual Torghast, so the one that you need for Soul Ash, the one that you need for legendary recipes and whatnot. Although you can get the recipes on Twisting Corridors as well, it's a little bit harder to complete. Instead, now they made it so that on your main, you're comfortably sitting at layer 8 on all the wings, so every single reset you can just hop in layer 8, complete it, and then complete the second one and you're done for the week. But on your alts, the ones you're leveling, the ones you're progressing, since it is going to take you essentially 3 weeks, waiting for all the 6 different wings of Torghast to rotate before you can progress through all of them at layer 8. Instead now with this hotfix, by the way, it's a hotfix that has already gone live, you don't have to wait the reset for this to happen, you can just immediately go up to layer 8, even on your alts. So that's gonna save you quite a lot of time in the progression of Torghast. It needs to be mentioned though, that even with the layers being nerfed by Blizzard, after the much complaining about the difficulty, the scaling of Torghast being a little bit too hard and particularly harder for melee DPS, layer 8 is still considerably harder than layer 1 or 2 or 3. So if you are an undergeared alt, very undergeared alt, it's not that getting a free unlocked layer 8 means you're going to be able to just stroll through and finish it easily. It's definitely easier than before, but it might still be a challenge for you, depending on how exactly undergeared your character is. Now the bigger change though, the bigger revelation Blizzard had yesterday is that they realized maybe, perhaps, Night Fae has a little bit too many OP arrows to their quiver. You have already heard from me the list of things that are OP with Night Fae, from their Soulbind passives to the timing, the early timing in which they can unlock potency conduits in their soulbinds, the power of their covenant abilities, even their utility covenant ability, soul shape being a blink. They did also have this thing on top of all of that. They had the fact that they could just spam Ardenweald trappers in their table missions together with just one unit, one hero, and just complete, pretty much win every single one of the missions. And also stroll through every single campaign mission with Dreamweaver. Essentially, the trappers were reducing the damage of the enemies to basically nothing, and then Dreamweaver was healing in the case they were taking any damage. This was in very stark contrast, particularly with Venthyr and with Kyrian, which were very, very poor in the power of their followers. So Blizzard decided to fix this. Apparently, they are claiming that the Bramble Trap ability from the trappers of Ardenweald was essentially bugged. Instead of reducing the damage for one turn, they were basically debuffing the enemies to have damage reduction indefinitely until the end of the fight, which is why they were doing so little damage. Now it has been correctly addressed. The effectiveness of this combo of using 4 trappers and 1 follower has been greatly reduced. Now regarding Night Fae, of course you have a problem now. You have the problem that the level of your missions, the elite missions that spawn, are going to be dependent on which level of the campaign missions you have cleared. So obviously, because you could use this combo, this 4 trappers plus Dreamweaver to clear every single main story mission, most of your missions right now are level 38, 42 elite missions. You could complete them with this cheat code, but now you can't anymore. So after this fix, you find yourself as a Night Fae with a bunch of super high level missions without pretty much a chance to actually clear them. So you're going to go back and do what other covenants like Kyrian and Venthyr had to do for like 2 months. Suicide missions. Just throw bodies to the slaughter. Just throw them in to die. That's basically going to be your to-go way to continue your table missions for a while now. Now, talking about the buffs. As I mentioned, Kyrian and Venthyr have been buffed. Now, this is another part of my compendium of complaining of this type of balancing. I mentioned this when we were talking about Covenant abilities. Covenant abilities being nerfed in the beta, and then when live launches, 1% of the player base is using this ability. So the question was, how did you even come to the conclusion of nerfing this in the beta, if this is the result in live? And then I pointed out some of the legendaries. Same thing, several legendaries being heavily nerfed and then live comes and nobody plays them. This is another example. When you look at these numbers, you're asking yourself, How were these tested? Telethaka's health has been increased by 100% and spell effectiveness increased by 167%. Stonehead health increased by 25% and spell effectiveness increased by 400%. Bogdan's spell effectiveness increased by 150%. You know, these seem like pretty major oversights to miss in balancing. What is also weird is that this is a completely non-combat related, non-power related activity. On this is not hinging the power level of your character. It's not something super delicate that Blizzard has to touch with cotton tweezers, just barely scraping the surface in fear of just breaking the whole thing. There is no raiding, PvP or Mythic Plus aftershock that can happen by touching this. So the confusing part is why was Blizzard so conservative in these changes? It's just a bunch of afterthought mission table content. It's something you think could be balanced very, very quickly. You don't have to run a million tests and gather a million logs worth of data to decide whether or not a spec or an ability or a legendary should be buffed or nerfed. And yet pretty much this wave of changes comes at the same time as the fourth round of balance changes for specs and classes, 2 months after the expansion. And you remember, certainly, if you were a Kyrian or a Venthyr, that you started having problems with missions even like 2 weeks into the expansion already. It was already known that the missions were significantly hard, and then it turned out significantly harder than something like Night Fae, and even to a degree than the Necrolords. So while I appreciate the changes to put Venthyr and Kyrian more in line with Night Fae, I still don't get why these changes came so late. These changes would not have affected any important part of the game activities you do every day. It shouldn't have taken this long to come to the conclusion that Night Fae was overloaded in power and then Venthyr and Kyrian were definitely weaker. So good changes. I think they're a little bit late. Now, with the main news of the day out of the way, let's go and talk about something else. Let's go and talk a little bit about how Mythic Plus has gone this week, because of course there are some things that were predicted to be happening, and they have happened, certainly. So let's start with number 1. This week, I know, it's not surprising, it was pretty predictable. This week is lining up to be the least represented week in Mythic Plus, in terms of players actually joining and completing keys. Of course, it has to do with the affixes. As predicted, bolstering, necrotic and tyrannical is a very bad week. It's very difficult, much more difficult than several other combinations. Very likely the hardest combination of tyrannical affixes you can get. So what it is looking like right now on Sunday, so it's like 5 days into the week, we just got 2 days left before reset, there is 735,000 logs in Mythic Plus, all keys. In comparison, because we have to put things in perspective, last week by the 7th day we had 1.7 million. So even in projection, by Tuesday we won't be able to get to half of this number. If you want to compare it with something similar, because last week of course was fortified, so maybe if it was compared to a tyrannical key, it's going to be a little bit different, not that much. The last tyrannical week was at 1.5 million, almost 1.6, so very close to the fortified week right after. So this week is very likely going to be the new front runner, the new title holder for the least represented week in Mythic Plus so far in this expansion. Talking about Mythic Plus still, there is a couple more things to mention that are pretty interesting. So number 1, I went on for a while saying that Brewmaster Monk had gotten a month, 4 full weeks of Mythic Plus being higher and more represented than Protection Paladin. Well, Protection Paladin players took that very personally, so they went in Mythic Plus playing in droves, and the result is that now is going to be the 2nd week in a row where Protection Paladin has taken the reins off of Brewmaster Monk as the 2nd more popular tank. Again, the words of the fall of Protection Paladin were greatly exaggerated, since it's still doing fine and kept up with Brewmaster Monk to fight for 2nd place, because of course 1st place is still in the hands of Vengeance Demon Hunter. When you look at the 20 keys for tanks is of course self-explanatory. 81% of tanks in 20 plus keys are just Vengeance. The other cool thing, since we have started following this over a month ago, Windwalker Monk has now gotten in the same percentage range of both Unholy and Outlaw Rogue. 17% versus 17.4 versus 17.9. So the rise of Windwalker continues, and then of course it's also worth mentioning that in the absolute highest keys, so the 20 plus, it continues to be the second most popular. It's also very interesting to look at Unholy Decay. In 20 plus keys, even warriors, Fury warriors, as well as Retribution paladins are passing Unholy Death Knight. So again, it's a pretty interesting fall from the 15 plus range, where Unholy is actually right now first, to the 20 and up, where it drops tremendously. Talking about drop, or alternatively, talking about rise, we have Holy Paladin. Another mention was that Holy Paladin was getting higher and higher in Mythic Plus, and Restoration Druid was getting lower and lower. This was still a thing 1 week ago. Has anything changed? Not really. In this week, Holy Paladin also has hinged even closer to Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid lost about 1.5% representation, while Holy Paladin gained almost 1.5%. So now they are even closer than 2% within each other. Resto Shaman is still there. Is still sitting at about 1/3 of all healers representation at 15 plus keys. The real interesting thing regarding healers, which is something I've seen popping up more and more, is the 20 and up. So the high competitive range of healers, Holy Paladin is first, not Restoration Shaman. This is the first time, this is the first week where all of the highest keys have gotten more Holy Paladin representation than any other spec. What is also hilarious is the continued drop when it comes to 20 and up keys of Restoration Druid. Now is literally even fighting with Holy Priest. I was about to say Holy Priest for last, not really last, it's just that Mystery Monk is not even present in the graph because nobody played it. Lastly, another interesting thing, although not very special, it's very depressing if you're not one of these three specs, I know, but Balanced Druid has now gotten more represented and more popular than Fire Mage. Marksmanship Hunter is still the most represented, never really gotten any threat from Fire and Balance, which have gotten to duke it out against each other, sort of like Brewmaster Monk and Protection Paladin. And currently, Balanced Druid is ahead. Now, of course, this week has Bolstering and Necrotic, particularly Necrotic. So you could have some inquiries. Is Balanced Druid getting more popular this week because of the use of Treants? Because of the use of Happy Little Trees? Has Holy Paladin blown up this week in representation of high keys because they have ways to help the tank with Necrotic and dropping stacks of Necrotic? It is a possibility. We will see it a little bit more clearly next week to see if this rise, if this surge of Balanced Druid has continued and this surge of Protection Paladin and Holy Paladin has continued even outside of Necrotic, or if it was just a 1 week thing. This was all for the week. I'm going to leave you to your festive Sunday activities, the last day of January. We will see each other in February, likely tomorrow. So, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, I'm gonna go and look for the Mistweaver monks. Where are they?